The scent of rain-soaked earth and desperation clung to the air. Ilara had never seen the sky, but she knew its moods by the feel of the wind on her skin and the smell it carried from the distant mountains. Today, it smelled of sorrow. She stood on the dais, a sacrificial lamb dressed in the finest wool her pack could no longer truly afford, the rough-spun fabric a testament to their decline. Her hands were bound not by rope, but by shame. Whispers slithered through the assembled pack members of the Whispering Fen. Wolfless, blind, an Omega curse. The words were barbs she had grown accustomed to, a skin of scars she wore beneath her tunic. Her father, Alpha Marcus, stood beside her, his posture rigid with a humiliation so profound she could feel it radiating from him like heat from a dying fire. He was about to trade his only daughter for their survival. As Alpha of the Whispering Fen, I offer this tribute to the Alpha King, he announced, his voice a gravelly echo of the power he once held. A debt of grain and steel, paid in flesh, my daughter, Ilara. A collective gasp, followed by more venomous murmurs. It was one thing to be given as tribute, another to be announced as payment. It stripped away the last veneer of honor, leaving only the cold, hard truth of their transaction. She was a commodity, less valuable than the wheat that had failed in their fields. Ilara kept her face a placid mask. Her blindness, a defect in the eyes of her pack, was her shield. It spared her from seeing the pity and scorn on their faces. Instead, she focused on the tapestry of sounds and scents around her. The shuffle of nervous feet, the cloying smell of fear sweat, the faint metallic tang of the king's guard standing impossibly still nearby. They smelled of cold iron and something else, something wild and ancient that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She had no wolf. It was the core of her shame, the reason she was deemed worthless. In a society built on the strength of the beast within, she was an empty vessel. Her other senses, however, were painfully acute. She could hear the frantic flutter of her father's heart, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of his ribs. She could feel the subtle shift in air pressure that signaled the approach of someone immense, someone who commanded the very space they occupied. This was him, the emissary of the Alpha King. "The king accepts," a voice boomed, devoid of warmth. It was deep and resonant, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. "She will be taken to the Obsidian Spire at once." Ilara flinched. The Obsidian Spire. Even the name was a dread-filled whisper on the wind. It was the fortress of King Theron, the Beast King, a ruler so feared and reclusive that no one from the outer territories had laid eyes on him in a decade. Legend said he was a monster, that his wolf had consumed his man, leaving only a feral tyrant in its place. They said his halls were decorated with the bones of his enemies, and that the mountain itself wept black tears in his presence. A rough hand gripped her arm. It was not one of the king's guards, but her father. He leaned close, his breath hot and sour with bitter wine. "Do not shame us further," he hissed, his words for her alone. "Be compliant. Your life is no longer your own. It is the price for our survival." There was no affection in his touch, no fatherly sorrow. Only the cold calculus of a leader cutting his losses. She was a loss. She had always been a loss. "I understand, Alpha," she murmured, the title a bitter stone in her mouth. She was led from the dais, her bare feet cold against the damp stone. Her sister Lyra rushed forward, her scent a familiar comfort of lavender and regret. Lyra's hands, warm and soft, found hers. "Ilara, I'm so sorry," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Lyra was everything Ilara was not. Sighted, beautiful, with a strong, promising wolf stirring within her. She was the pack's hope. Ilara was its burden. "It is not your fault," Ilara said, squeezing her sister's hand. It was a lie. They both knew that if Lyra had been the one offered, the pack would have rioted. But offering the broken Omega? That was just practical. The King's Guard, his beta, if the scent of authority was any indication, pulled her away from her sister. The journey is long. We leave now. She did not look back. There was nothing to see. Her world had always been a tapestry of sensations, and now it was simply unraveling one thread at a time, leaving only the cold certainty of her fate. She was being sent to a monster, a payment for a debt, a life traded for a season's worth of grain. Her own pack had cast her out, and she was walking, blind and alone, into the heart of darkness. But within that darkness, a tiny, defiant spark refused to be extinguished. They thought her weak, a broken thing to be discarded. They had no idea that her true strength was forged in the very shadows they so feared. The journey to the obsidian spire was a blur of sensations, the rhythmic clopping of hooves on stone, the scent of pine and high-altitude cold, the bite of the wind that grew sharper the higher they climbed. Ilara was placed in a covered carriage, a cage of wood and leather that amplified her sense of isolation. The guard, the one whose voice was like grinding stones, rode beside the carriage. He never spoke to her. She was cargo. She had learned long ago to build worlds in her mind, to paint landscapes with scent and sound. The lowlands were a humid quilt of damp soil and floral rot. The midlands were sharp with the scent of birch and wild herbs. But as they ascended into the king's domain, the air thinned, becoming pure and cold. It smelled of granite, ice, and a faint, almost imperceptible trace of ozone, as if a storm perpetually brewed on the peak. After what felt like days, the carriage shuddered to a halt. The door creaked open, and a blast of frigid air hit her. "Out!" the guard commanded. He helped her down, his grip firm and impersonal on her arm. The ground beneath her feet was not earth, but smoothly polished stone that felt unnaturally cold. The air here was different, heavy with a palpable sense of power that made her skin tingle. This was the obsidian spire. "My name is Kale," the guard said, his tone clipped. "I am the king's beta. You will follow me. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not touch anything." She nodded, her throat too dry to form words. He led her forward, his hand a rigid vice on her elbow. The fortress was silent. Eerily so. For a place that must have housed hundreds, there were no footsteps, no voices, no clatter of work. There was only the sound of their own feet echoing in a vast cavernous space, and the distant mournful howl of the wind whipping around the mountain's peak. The air smelled of cold stone, beeswax, and something else. A deep, musky scent of predator, of a power so immense it had saturated the very walls of the castle. It was the scent of the Alpha King. They walked for what felt like miles, up winding stairs and down long, cold corridors. Finally, Kale stopped before a set of massive doors. He did not knock. The doors swung open on their own, silent as a grave. "The king will see you now," Kale said, his voice a low rumble of warning. He released her arm and gave her a slight push forward. "Enter." The doors closed behind her with a soft, final thud, sealing her in. The silence in this room was heavier, more profound. The predatory scent was overwhelming, a physical pressure against her skin. She stood frozen, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "The tribute from Whispering Fen," a voice said. It was not loud, but it filled the entire space, a low, dangerous purr that vibrated through the stone floor and up into her bones. "They sent me their broken Omega." A bold insult, or a desperate plea? Ilara could not pinpoint his location. The acoustics of the room were strange, making his voice seem to come from everywhere at once. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain still. Her father's final words echoed in her mind. "Be compliant. I am as my alpha commanded, your majesty, she said, her voice a thin, reedy thing, a soft footfall. He was moving. He circled her, silent as a shadow. She could feel his presence, a vortex of raw power that disrupted the air around him. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was immense. They say you are blind, he stated, not a question. Yes, my lord. And wolfless. Yes, my lord. A long, tense silence stretched between them. She could hear his breathing, a slow, controlled rhythm that did nothing to soothe the frantic pace of her own. He was assessing her, and she had no doubt he found her wanting. You do not smell of fear, he observed, his voice laced with a cold curiosity. You are terrified. Your heart is a trapped bird, but the scent is masked. Why? Ilara hesitated. It was a secret she had never shared, a small piece of control in a life that offered none. Fear is a weakness, my lord. My pack taught me to hide it well. Your pack taught you to be a victim. There is a difference. He moved again, and a moment later, she felt the shocking touch of his fingers against her chin. His skin was warm, his touch surprisingly gentle as he tilted her head up. The contact was like lightning striking her skin, but it was what she felt from him that stole her breath. Through that single point of contact, a torrent of sensation flooded her. Pain, a deep, ancient agony that was woven into the very fabric of his being. It was a chaotic storm of rage, loneliness, and a bone-deep weariness that spoke of a battle fought every second of every day. It was so overwhelming, so raw, that she gasped, stumbling back as if she had touched a roaring fire. He immediately dropped his hand, and the connection was severed. The room was silent again, but the echo of his pain still vibrated through her. What is it? He demanded, his voice sharp, edged with suspicion. What did you feel? She couldn't tell him. To admit she could feel his emotions, his deepest wound, would be to expose herself completely. It was her one secret, her one true sense. Nothing, my lord. She lied, her voice trembling. You startled me. He didn't believe her. She could feel his skepticism, a cold wave in the air. He stepped closer again, and she braced herself. But instead of touching her face, his hand closed around her wrist. The storm crashed over her again, but this time, he held on. The agony was a living thing, a beast clawing at the inside of his skin, screaming to be released. It was a curse, a poison in his blood. And beneath it all, a core of profound isolation. He was a king on a throne of glass, terrified that one wrong move would shatter everything, including himself. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she did what she had only ever done for injured animals or her weeping sister. She focused, not on the pain, but on the man beneath it. She sent a wave of calm through their connection, a silent whisper of peace into the hurricane of his soul. Hush, be still, you are not alone. For a fleeting second the storm in him quieted, a moment of stunned silence, a single pure note of peace in an eternity of chaos. Theron froze. For the first time in 15 years, the ceaseless gnawing rage of the beast within him faltered. It hadn't vanished, but it had receded, baffled by this strange, gentle warmth spreading from the point where he held the Omega's wrist. It was like a cool balm on a blistering burn. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been scorched, the beast roaring back to life in protest of the relief's absence. He stared at the blind girl who now trembled before him, her head bowed. What in the hells was she? Kale! He roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the hall. The great doors opened instantly, and his beta was there, his expression grim. My king? Take her to the queen's wing, Theron commanded, his voice tight. He turned his back on Alara, unable to look at her, unable to process what had just happened. Postguards. She is not to leave. No one is to enter. Kale's eyes widened in shock. The Queen's wing had been sealed for over 20 years, since the death of Theron's mother. It was a sacred, sorrowful place. To put a tribute, a worthless Omega tribute there, it was unheard of. My lord? Kale questioned, his confusion evident. You heard me, Theron snarled, not turning around. Go. Now. Kyle bowed his head, his face a mask of obedience. He gently took Alara's arm. She flinched at the touch, but allowed herself to be led away. As the doors closed, Theron was left alone once more with the roaring monster in his soul. But now, it was different. For the first time, he had felt a moment of quiet, a moment of peace, and it had come from the touch of a blind, wolfless Omega girl who had been sent to him as an insult. He didn't know what she was, or what magic she possessed. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was never, ever letting her go. The Queen's wing was a place frozen in time. As Kale led Alara through its silent halls, she could smell the faint, lingering scent of dried roses and old parchment, a ghostly perfume overlaid with decades of undisturbed dust. The air was still and cold, a pocket of the past sealed away from the present. Kale deposited her in a chamber that felt vast and opulent. A thick fur rug cushioned her bare feet, and the air held the scent of cedar from a massive wardrobe and clean, cold linen from a bed she could sense was large enough for 4 people. You will remain here, Kale said, his voice softer now, tinged with a confusion he couldn't quite hide. Food and water will be brought. Do not try to leave. The door clicked shut, and the sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place echoed in the silence. Alara was a prisoner in a dead queen's chambers. She cautiously explored her new cage, her hands tracing the smooth, cold marble of a fireplace, the rich velvet of a heavy curtain, the carved wood of a dressing table. On its surface, her fingers found the cool, smooth contours of a silver-backed brush. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her entire body still humming from the king's touch. The sheer magnitude of his suffering was a brand on her soul. It wasn't just anger or a thirst for power, it was a curse, a living, breathing agony that he wrestled with every moment. And her touch, somehow, had soothed it. Was this her power? This strange empathy that had always been dismissed as Omega sensitivity? She had always been able to feel the emotions of others, a chaotic jumble she'd learned to block out. But with him, it was different. It was a focused, overwhelming force. For the next few days, Alara lived in a state of suspended reality. Twice a day, a silent servant would unbolt the door, leave a tray of food, and leave without a word. The food was simple, but nourishing. Thick stew, fresh bread, cheese. Far better than the meager rations she was used to. The solitude was absolute. She was alone with her thoughts and the ghost of the king's pain. On the 4th night, the bolt on her door slid back long after her evening meal had been delivered. Her head snapped up, her senses on high alert. The heavy scent of predator and ozone filled the corridor before he even entered the room. The king. He closed the door behind him, plunging the room back into silence. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his presence a crushing weight. Alara rose slowly from the chair by the cold hearth, her hands clasped before her. My lord, she whispered into the darkness. Walk with me, he commanded, his voice a low growl. He did not offer his arm. He simply turned and walked, expecting her to follow the sound of his footsteps. She did, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors as she trailed him through the winding, empty corridors of his fortress. He led her to a place she could immediately identify by the scent. A library. The rich, intoxicating aroma of aging paper, leather bindings, and ink filled her senses. It was a smell she loved, a scent of stories and worlds she could travel to in her mind. She heard him sink into what sounded like a large leather chair. "Tell me what you felt," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier command, leaving only a raw, weary demand. "When I touched you in the throne room, do not lie to me again." Ilara's breath hitched. There was no escaping it. He knew she was more than she appeared. I feel things," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Emotions. When I touch someone, I can feel what they feel. It is usually confusing, a clamor. And with me?" he pressed. She took a shaky breath. "With you, it was a storm. It was pain. So much pain. Like a beast clawing to get out. A curse." The silence that followed was so absolute she thought he might have stopped breathing. She could feel the shock rippling off him, followed by a wave of cold, dangerous fury. "Who told you of the curse?" he snarled. "No one, my lord. I swear it." "I felt it," she cried, taking an involuntary step back. "It's a sickness in your blood, a shadow wrapped around your wolf." He rose from the chair, the sound of creaking leather loud in the stillness. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just before her. He radiated a lethal energy, the beast within him stirring, provoked by the exposure of its deepest secret. "You are either a spy or a witch," he rasped, his voice a deadly purr. "Either way, your life is forfeit." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and useless. "I am neither. I am just me. It is a thing I have always been able to do. My pack called it a defect. They said it made me weak, oversensitive." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air just inches from her face. She could feel the heat, the power, the indecision warring within him. He wanted to kill her for what she knew, but he also wanted something else. The relief. The peace. His fingers brushed her cheek, and the connection slammed back into place. The rage was there, a roaring inferno, but this time she was ready for it. She met it not with fear, but with the same quiet calm as before. She did not try to fight it or banish it. She simply accepted it. She wrapped her own energy around it, a soft blanket over a thrashing monster. A ragged groan was torn from his throat. His entire body shuddered, and he sagged against the bookshelves, his hand still cupping her face. The inferno within him banked, the roiling storm subsiding to a low, manageable thunder. "How?" he breathed, his voice raw with disbelief and a desperation that broke her heart. "How do you do that?" "I don't know," she whispered honestly, her own tears now falling freely. "I just listen to the part of you that is hurting." He stayed like that for a long moment, his forehead pressed against the cool wood of the bookshelf, his hand gentle on her skin, drawing a strange, forbidden comfort from her touch. He was the most powerful being she had ever encountered, a king feared throughout the lands, and yet, in this moment, he was utterly vulnerable. A wounded animal soothed by the one creature in the world who could see his true injury. From that night on, a new routine was established. Every evening, he would come for her. Sometimes they would walk the battlements, and he would describe the starlit panorama she could not see, his voice a low rumble as he painted pictures for her with words. Other times, they would sit in the library, and she would tell him stories her grandmother had told her, simple tales of moon spirits and forest sprites. And every night, he would require her touch, a hand on his arm, fingers laced with his, her palm pressed against his chest. Each time she would feel the beast, and each time she would soothe it into a grudging slumber. He never spoke of the curse again, and she never asked. But a fragile, unspoken bond was forming between them in the shared darkness. He was her captor, she his prisoner. But she was also his healer, and he, in a strange way, was her sanctuary. This growing intimacy did not go unnoticed. Cale watched his king with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The dark moods that had plagued Theron for years were lessening. The violent outbursts were gone. But he also saw the way Theron looked at the Omega girl, an intensity that bordered on obsession. Others were not so hopeful. Lord Vorlag, the king's uncle and a powerful member of his council, saw Ilara's influence as a poison. The king was supposed to be a weapon, a beast held on a tight leash, not a man softened by a defective Omega. Vorlag's scent, whenever Ilara caught it in the hallways, was of bitter ambition and decay. He watched her from the shadows, his disapproval a palpable force. He saw a weakness in the king to be exploited, and Ilara was the key. He just needed to find a way to turn it. Theron stood on the highest battlement of the obsidian spire, the wind a physical blow against his chest. Below, his kingdom sprawled, a patchwork of dark forests and moon-silvered rivers. For 15 years he had ruled this land from the shadows, a king in name but a prisoner in truth. A prisoner of the beast that lived under his skin. His thoughts, for the first time in memory, were clear. The constant snarling rage that was his companion had been muted to a dull ache, a sleeping predator rather than a ravenous one. And it was all because of her. Ilara. He turned his gaze from the landscape to the library window, where a single candle burned. She was in there, waiting for him. The thought sent a jolt, not of lust, but of a desperate, possessive need through him. She was his balm, his peace, his. The shift in his perspective was seismic. He had accepted her as tribute, a thing, a piece of property to be used and discarded. He had intended to let her live out her days in some forgotten corner of the fortress, a mild curiosity. But after her touch, after she had looked into the very heart of his damnation and not flinched, everything had changed. He found himself craving her presence, the soft cadence of her voice, the way she tilted her head when she listened, her entire being focused on the world of sound and sensation. He described sunsets to her, the sharp, jagged lines of the mountain peaks, the flight of an eagle, and she, in turn, described the world back to him in a way he had never considered. The texture of the wind, the scent of approaching snow, the emotional color of a piece of music. He was beginning to see the world through her senses, and it was a world far richer than the one he had inhabited. His wolf, the cursed part of him, felt it too. The beast had always hated everything and everyone. It saw threats in every shadow, insults in every glance. But with Ilara, it was different. It was still possessive, dangerously so. It viewed her as its treasure, a precious thing to be hoarded and guarded. Any threat to her would be met with unparalleled violence, but it did not wish her harm. It wanted to curl around her, to protect her, to keep her safe in its dark embrace. He pushed off the wall and made his way to the library. His obsession with her was a weakness. His uncle, Vorlag, had already made a veiled comment in council that morning about the king's new distraction. Vorlag, with his vulture's eyes and jackal's smile, missed nothing. He saw Theron's newfound calm not as a blessing, but as a softening, a crack in the armor of the Beast King. Theron entered the library without a sound. Ilara was curled in the large leather chair by the fire, a heavy book open on her lap. She wasn't reading, of course, but her fingers were tracing the embossed letters on the cover, as if absorbing the story through touch. She looked small and fragile in the vast, shadowed room, yet she possessed a strength that humbled him. "You are late," she said softly, not looking up. "The council ran long," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. He walked over to the fire, standing beside her chair. Vorlag grows bold. He speaks of alliances and strength, implying mine is failing. Alara closed the book and set it aside. He does not smell of strength, she said quietly. He smells of rot, like meat left too long in the sun. His ambition is a sickness. Theron looked down at her, a bitter smile twisting his lips. A blind Omega sees more clearly than my entire court. He knelt before her chair, an act of submission that would have shocked any who witnessed it. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The familiar wave of peace washed over him as her unique energy met his. The dull ache of the beast receded further. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment of quiet. "Tell me of the curse," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely a breath. It was the first time she had asked. His eyes snapped open. The beast stirred, a low growl in the back of his mind. Betrayal. Secret. "There is nothing to tell," he said, his voice hard. "Every story has a beginning," she insisted gently, her thumb stroking the back of his hand, calming the nascent anger. "The pain I feel from you, it has roots. It is not just a thing that is, but a thing that happened." He pulled his hand away, rising to his feet to pace before the fire. The shadows danced across his face, making his features seem harsh and unforgiving. He had not spoken of it to a living soul, not even Kale knew the full truth. "When I was a boy," he began, the words tasting like ash, "my father took me on my first ritual hunt. It is a rite of passage for alphas of the royal line, to track and kill a shadow cat, alone, to prove the strength of your wolf." He stopped, his back to her, staring into the flames. "But we were ambushed. Not by beasts, but by men. Assassins from the southern wastes, hired by my father's rivals." He could still smell the blood, feel the cold terror of a child facing death. "My father fought to protect me. He was a great warrior, but there were too many. They struck him down. I watched him die." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a story told so many times in the privacy of his own nightmares that it had been worn smooth of feeling. "My own wolf, newly emerged and wild with terror and rage, burst forth. But one of the assassins was a hedge witch. As my father fell, she chanted, and she threw a powder of bone and black salt at me. It was not meant to kill me. It was meant to break me, to poison my wolf, to twist it into something uncontrollable, a curse of eternal rage." He turned to face Alara, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "It worked. My wolf became a monster, a thing of shadow and fury. I lost control. I slaughtered them all, every last assassin. But in my frenzy, I could not tell friend from foe. I also killed my father's most loyal guards who had come to our aid." The shame of it was a physical weight, a cloak he had worn for 15 years. When the rage subsided, I was left standing in a field of bodies, covered in the blood of both enemies and allies. My own pack looked at me with horror. A boy of 16 who had become a monster. My uncle Vorlag was the first to call me the Beast King, a name meant to control me, to remind me of the monster I carried. I have not let my wolf out since that day. I keep it caged, but it claws at me always. It screams for release. That is the pain you feel, Alara. It is the scream of my own soul." He stood before her, utterly exposed, his deepest wound laid bare. He expected fear, revulsion, perhaps even pity. Instead, Alara rose from her chair and slowly, cautiously, closed the distance between them. She reached out, her small, gentle hands coming to rest on his chest, directly over his heart. She did not speak. She simply held him, and poured every ounce of her strange, quiet power into him. It was not a cure, but it was a comfort so profound it made his knees weak. It was acceptance. It was a silent promise that she was not afraid. In that moment, a terrifying, exhilarating realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The faint, subtle pull he had felt towards her, the possessiveness of his wolf, the craving for her presence. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. Mate. The word exploded in his soul, a revelation that both thrilled and terrified him. This blind, wolfless Omega, this tribute of shame, was his other half, the one soul in the universe meant to complete his. And he, a cursed monster, was hers. It was a cruel jest of the fates, a blessing and a damnation all in one. The revelation of the mate bond changed everything. For Theron, it was like a key turning in a lock he never knew existed. The world sharpened, colors seemed brighter, the air itself thrummed with a new energy. All of it was centered on Alara. His protective instincts, already heightened, became an overwhelming primal force. The thought of anyone, especially Vorlog, harming her, sent waves of murderous rage through him, a rage that was harder than ever to contain. For Alara, the change was more subtle but no less profound. The connection she felt to him intensified. His moods became her own, his pain a constant hum beneath her skin. But there was something new, too, a sense of belonging, of rightness, that she had never known. For her entire life, she had been an outsider, a broken piece that didn't fit. With Theron, she felt whole. The jagged edges of her loneliness were soothed by his presence. Their nightly meetings deepened in intimacy. He would read to her from ancient texts, his deep voice giving life to forgotten histories. She would tell him about her dreams, which had grown more vivid since her arrival, filled with strange landscapes of light and shadow she couldn't comprehend. They talked for hours, sharing fears and hopes in the quiet sanctuary of the library. The physical contact they shared became less about healing and more about a simple, desperate need to be close. But outside their secluded world, tensions in the fortress were escalating. Vorlog saw the king's obsession with the Omega as the perfect tool to pry him from the throne. A king ruled by his heart, especially a heart set on a defective tribute, was a king who could not be trusted to lead their people, who valued only strength. Vorlog began to sow seeds of dissent among the other pack alphas who served on the king's council. He spoke of the king's reclusiveness, his refusal to take a proper, high-born mate to secure the royal line, and now, his inexplicable attachment to a wolfless, blind girl. "He is compromised," Vorlog would say in hushed, urgent tones over cups of spiced wine. "The curse has finally rotted his mind. He seeks comfort from a broken toy. What happens when our enemies from the south rise again? Will he send his Omega to soothe them with stories?" His words found fertile ground in the minds of alphas who had long chafed under Theron's brutal, distant rule. They respected his power, but they did not love him. Fear was the only currency he had ever traded in, and now that fear was being eroded by whispers of weakness. One afternoon, as Alara was being escorted back to her rooms by a young guard, Vorlog chose to make his move. He intercepted them in a cold, echoing corridor. "Leave us," Vorlog commanded the guard. The young wolf hesitated, his orders clear from the king himself. "Now!" Vorlog snarled, flashing a hint of his own alpha power. The guard bowed his head and retreated, his fear of the king's uncle overriding his duty. Alara stood her ground, her body tense. She could smell the decay of his ambition, sharper and more sour than ever before. "The little Omega," Vorlog purred, circling her like a shark, "the king's pet. Tell me, what spells have you woven to ensnare him so completely? A king who has not known the touch of a woman in 15 years is now led around by a blind, barren half-wolf." "I have woven no spells," Alara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The king's heart is his own." Vorlog laughed, a dry, rasping sound. His heart? My nephew has no heart. He has a monster in its place, a monster you seem to have charmed, a dangerous game, little one. When he tires of you, he will crush you like a twig. Or perhaps, the beast will simply get loose one day. What will your calming touch do then, I wonder? He stepped closer, invading her space. He keeps you hidden away, a dirty little secret. But the packs are growing restless. They demand a queen, a strong Luna to bear strong alpha heirs. You are neither. You are a liability, a weakness he cannot afford. If I am so weak, why do you feel the need to threaten me? Alara countered, a spark of defiance flaring within her. Vorlog's amusement vanished, replaced by a cold fury. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. Because your weakness is contagious, you are infecting him, making him forget what he is. He is a weapon, and you are dulling his edge. The kingdom needs a sharp blade to protect it, not a lovesick boy. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. End this. Convince him to send you away. If you do not, I will be forced to remove you myself. And I assure you, my methods will be far less pleasant than a quiet retirement to a distant convent. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling against the cold stone wall. He walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving her alone and trembling, the foul scent of his presence clinging to her like a shroud. The encounter terrified her, but not for her own safety. It was the truth in his words that chilled her to the bone. You are a liability, a weakness he cannot afford. Was she? Was her presence here, the comfort she provided, ultimately going to be the thing that destroyed Theron? She was his mate, but she was also a wolfless omega. In the eyes of their world, she could never be a true queen. By loving him, was she signing his death warrant? That night, when Theron came to her, he sensed her distress immediately. The air around her was thick with fear and turmoil. What is it? He demanded, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. Who has troubled you? She couldn't bring herself to tell him about Vorlog's threat. It would only feed the beast, send him into a rage that could have terrible consequences. So she lied. It is nothing. Just a sad memory. But as she reached for him to offer the comfort he sought, a sliver of doubt had wedged itself into her heart. For the first time, she consciously held a piece of herself back, shielding him from the full force of her fear. And in doing so, she felt the beast in him stir. Restless and unsoothed, sensing the barrier she had erected between them. The fragile peace they had built was beginning to crack. The barrier between them, however small, was a chasm. Theron felt it instantly. The solace he found in Alara's touch was still there, but it was muted, as if he were hearing his favorite song through a thick wall. Her own inner turmoil was a discordant note in the harmony they had created, and it agitated his beast. The monster did not understand emotional subtleties. It only understood that its source of peace was compromised, and it reacted with suspicion and aggression. Theron grew more possessive, his temper shortening. He doubled the guards outside her door and forbade her from walking the corridors with anyone but him or Kale. He was trying to protect her, but to Alara, the grand fortress began to feel more like a cage than ever before. Vorlog's words echoed in her mind, poisoning her thoughts. He keeps you hidden away, a dirty little secret. She knew she had to make a choice. She could tell Theron about Vorlog's threats, likely inciting a bloody confrontation that could tear the court apart. Or she could do as Vorlag suggested and leave, sacrificing her own happiness for Theron's political stability. To give up the only belonging she had ever known was a pain sharper than any insult she had ever endured. But the thought of being the cause of his downfall was unbearable. She decided on a third option, to prove her worth. If she could not be a queen in the traditional sense, with a strong wolf and political alliances, she would be something else. She would be a healer. She began by asking Kale for access to the fortress's healing rooms. The beta was hesitant, his orders from the king absolute. "The king wishes you to remain in your wing," Kale said, his face a stoic mask. "I am not asking to leave the fortress," Ilara pressed, her tone gentle but firm. "There are sick and injured within these walls, are there not? Guards hurt in training, servants with fevers. Let me help, it is the only skill I have." Kale studied her, his gaze weighing her sincerity. He had seen the positive change in his king, but he also saw the growing storm on the political horizon. Perhaps giving her a purpose, a role beyond being the king's companion, could be a good thing. It might show the court she was more than a pet. "I will consider it," he conceded. The next day, Kale escorted her to the infirmary. It was a clean, sparse place, smelling of antiseptic herbs and sickness. The head healer, an old wolf named Elspeth, looked at Ilara with open skepticism. "The king sends us an omega plaything?" Elspeth sniffed, her voice sharp. "We have no time for games here." "I am not a toy," Ilara replied calmly, "and I am not here to play. I am here to help." Her first test came in the form of a young guard whose arm had been badly broken in the training yard, a compound fracture that refused to set properly. He was in constant, agonizing pain, and fever was beginning to set in. Elspeth had done all she could with poultices and splints. Ilara approached the boy's cot. She could feel his pain as a sharp, stabbing rhythm in the air. "May I?" she asked, her hand hovering over his injured arm. The boy, delirious with pain, just groaned. Ilara gently placed her hands on his forehead. As she had with Theron, she didn't try to block the pain, but to understand it. She felt the sharp edges of the broken bone, the hot throb of infection, the deep ache of stressed muscle. And beneath it, the boy's terror. She sent a wave of calm into him, a cool whisper of peace. His frantic breathing slowed. Then she moved her hands to his arm, letting her fingers trace the injury through the bandages. She focused her energy, not on brute force, but on persuasion. She visualized the bones aligning, the inflammation receding, the body's own healing energies being coaxed into action. It was slow, painstaking work, and it left her feeling drained and lightheaded. She worked for over an hour until sweat beaded on her brow. When she finally pulled her hands away, the boy was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The angry heat radiating from his arm had subsided to a gentle warmth. Elspeth, who had watched the entire process with narrowed eyes, stepped forward and unwrapped the bandages. She gasped. The swelling had visibly reduced, and the grotesque angle of the break was now nearly straight. "By the moon," she breathed. "What did you do?" "I listened to the injury," Ilara said simply, "and helped it remember how to be whole." Word of the Omega healer spread through the fortress like wildfire. Soon, a small, steady stream of patients came to her. A kitchen maid with crippling migraines, a blacksmith with a burn that wouldn't heal, an old warrior whose battle-scarred joints ached with the coming cold. She helped them all. Her power was not miraculous. It couldn't regrow limbs or cure fatal diseases, but it accelerated natural healing, eased pain, and calmed troubled minds in a way no herb or salve could. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt a sense of purpose. She was not Ilara the blind, Ilara the wolfless. She was Ilara the healer. The servants and guards began to look at her not with pity or suspicion, but with a quiet respect. Theron learned of her activities through Kale. A part of him, the possessive, paranoid beast, wanted to lock her away again, to keep her power all to himself. But the man, the king, felt a surge of fierce pride. She was not just his mate, his solace. She was a force of good in her own right. She was proving her worth to his people on her own terms. This, however, made her an even greater threat to Vorlog. Her growing popularity among the common soldiers and staff was a complication he hadn't anticipated. A beloved healer was much harder to dispose of than a reviled pet. He needed to escalate his plans. He needed to force the king's hand, to expose the monster to the entire world, and to use Ilara as the catalyst. He devised a plan, one that was both cruel and brilliant. There was to be a formal feast to welcome a delegation of allied alphas from the Silver Creek Pack. It would be the first time in years Theron had hosted such an event. Vorlog knew Theron would be on edge, the presence of so many powerful wolves a strain on his control. Vorlog would use the feast to set his trap. He would orchestrate a public threat to Ilara, something so direct and violent that Theron's beast would have no choice but to emerge in her defense. And when the monster appeared, in front of the most powerful alphas in the northern clans, Vorlog would be there to put it down, seizing the crown from the head of a cursed, uncontrollable king. All he needed was the right bait. The night of the feast arrived, cloaking the obsidian spire in a nervous energy. The great hall, usually a cavern of echoing silence, was ablaze with torchlight and filled with the boisterous sounds of visiting wolves. The air was thick with the smells of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the intermingled scents of dozens of powerful shifters. For Ilara, it was a sensory assault. Theron had insisted she attend, seated at his right hand. It was a bold political statement. He was not hiding her. He was presenting her to his allies. Dressed in a simple gown of deep blue velvet, a gift from the king, she felt a terrifying mixture of pride and dread. She could feel the stares of the assembled alphas, could smell their curiosity, their disdain, their surprise. Theron was a pillar of tension beside her. She rested a hand on his arm beneath the table and felt the beast churning within him, agitated by the crowd, by the challenge to his dominance that so many alphas in one room represented. She sent a steady stream of calm into him, a silent anchor in his internal storm. He gave her hand a grateful squeeze, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Lord Vorlog was seated further down the high table, his rotten scent masked by expensive cologne. Ilara could feel his gaze on her, cold and calculating. He was waiting for something. The air around him was coiled like a snake ready to strike. The feast progressed. Speeches were made, toasts were drunk. Alpha Kalen of the Silver Creek Pack, a grizzled old wolf with a booming laugh, seemed intrigued by Ilara. The Beast King emerges from his cave, and with a mysterious beauty at his side, he rumbled, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "She carries no pack scent I recognize, Your Majesty." "She is of my pack now," Theron stated, his voice a low growl that cut through the hall's chatter, leaving no room for argument. "She is under my personal protection." The statement hung in the air, a clear warning. Vorlog chose that moment to act. He rose from his seat, a goblet of wine in his hand. "A toast," he called out, his voice smooth as poisoned honey, "to the king and to his companion. May she bring him comfort in his solitude." The word comfort was layered with insinuation, painting Ilara as little more than a courtesan. As he spoke, a servant, his face pale with terror and his scent reeking of coercion, stumbled near Ilara. He was carrying a large platter of roasted fowl. With a manufactured cry of alarm, he tripped, sending the heavy silver platter and its contents hurtling directly toward Ilara. It happened in a flash. But for Theron, time slowed to a crawl. He saw the trajectory of the platter, the glint of something small and sharp hidden amongst the food. A silver-tipped dagger, its blade coated in the sickly sweet smell of wolfsbane. It wasn't just an accident. It was an assassination attempt, disguised as a clumsy mistake. It was aimed directly at Ilara's heart. A primal roar of pure, undiluted fury ripped from Theron's throat. It was not the voice of a man or a king. It was the howl of the beast uncaged. He moved faster than any eye could follow. One moment he was seated. The next he was a blur of motion, his body shielding Alara's. He didn't just block the platter. He smashed it from the air with a backhand, the silver crumpling like foil against his inhuman strength. The dagger flew free, clattering harmlessly to the stone floor. But the beast, awakened by the threat to its mate, was not satisfied. It was out. The transformation was horrific and instantaneous. Theron's body convulsed, bones cracking and reshaping with sickening speed. His fine clothing tore away as his form expanded, muscles bunching and twisting into something monstrous. Black, shadowy fur sprouted from his skin, and his face elongated into a nightmare snout, filled with teeth like obsidian daggers. His eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. He was not a wolf. He was a demon wearing a wolf's skin, a creature of shadow and rage, larger than any two wolves combined. The curse was visible now, writhing over his form like living darkness, tendrils of shadow lashing out at the air. The great hall erupted into chaos. Alphas shouted in alarm, drawing weapons. Chairs were overturned as guests scrambled away from the monstrous apparition on the dais. The servant who had dropped the platter screamed in pure terror, scrambling backwards on his hands and knees. The beast that was Theron turned its burning gaze on the servant, a low, guttural snarl vibrating through the hall. It took a step, its massive claws scraping grooves into the stone floor. It was going to tear the man to ribbons. "No!" Alara's voice, clear and commanding, cut through the panic. She had been knocked to the floor in the commotion, but she scrambled back to her feet. Blind to the horrifying sight, she was guided only by the sound of his snarls and the maelstrom of agony she felt from him. She stepped in front of the cowering servant, placing herself directly in the monster's path. "Theron!" she cried out, her voice trembling but resolute. "Look at me." "It's me, Alara." The beast paused, its head cocked. The scent of its mate, the sound of her voice, penetrated the red haze of its rage. It snarled, confused, the instinct to kill warring with the instinct to protect the one who stood before it. "He was a pawn," Alara said, her hands outstretched, palms open in a gesture of peace. "He was forced. The threat is not him. Look elsewhere." From across the room, Vorlog watched, a triumphant smirk on his face. This was perfect. The king had transformed into a monster in front of witnesses. He had lost control. Vorlag drew his own silver sword, its polished surface gleaming in the torchlight. "The king is gone!" Vorlog bellowed, stepping forward to rally the other alphas. "The curse has consumed him. We must put the beast down before it slaughters us all." But Alara stood her ground. She took another slow step toward the terrifying creature, toward her mate. The heat rolling off its body was intense, the smell of ozone and raw power overwhelming. She ignored the screams of the crowd, the shouts of Vorlog. She focused only on the tortured soul trapped within the monstrous form. "Theron," she whispered, her voice now gentle, intimate. "I am not afraid. Come back to me." She reached out her hand, her fingers trembling, and touched the shadowy fur on its massive snout. The moment her skin made contact, the beast recoiled as if struck by lightning. A pained, keening howl was ripped from its throat. The writhing shadows around its body flickered and dimmed. Her touch, her calm, her acceptance. It was a weapon the curse had no defense against. The red glow in its eyes softened, and for a split second, a flicker of the man of Theron looked out at her with confusion and anguish. He had exposed his deepest shame, his most terrifying secret to the entire world, and to her. He expected her to run, to scream. Instead, she stood before him, a beacon of calm in the chaos, her hand a gentle anchor on the monster he had become. The beast within him quieted, not into submission, but into a state of stunned awe. It had found its master, not in a king's will, but in an Omega's touch. The moment stretched, taut and silent, a bubble of stillness in the pandemonium of the great hall. The beast stood frozen, its monstrous form held in check by Alara's gentle hand. Vorlag saw his opportunity slipping away. The other alphas, who had been ready to fight, were now watching the scene with a mixture of terror and wonder. "Do not be fooled by this witch's tricks," Vorlag roared, striding forward, his silver sword held ready. "The monster is playing possum. Strike now while we have the advantage." He lunged, not at the beast, but at Ilara. It was a calculated, vicious move. If he could remove her, the king's anchor, the beast's rage would surely explode, proving Vorlag's point and forcing the other alphas to side with him. Theron saw the flash of silver out of the corner of his eye. The threat was not to him, but to his mate. A new kind of rage, colder and more focused than the curse's wild fury, surged through him. It was the protective wrath of a male defending his own. He moved. With a snarl that shook the rafters, he swatted Vorlag aside with a single contemptuous blow from his massive foreleg. The force of the impact sent Vorlag flying across the room, his sword clattering away as he crashed into a stone pillar and slumped to the ground, stunned and broken. The beast then turned its full attention back to Ilara. It lowered its massive head, its glowing red eyes fixated on her face. Slowly, carefully, it nudged her hand with its snout, a silent plea. The rage was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering agony and shame. He had revealed his ugliness to her. Tears streamed down Ilara's face, but she did not pull away. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking his fur. "I see you, Theron. All of you. And I am not afraid." This act of defiance, this profound acceptance, was the final key. Theron made a choice. Not just to protect her, but to trust her. To trust that she would not abandon him. He let go of the iron control he had maintained for 15 years. He stopped fighting the beast and instead surrendered to his mate. A wave of brilliant silver light erupted from his body, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. It was not the dark energy of the curse, but something pure and powerful. The monstrous form began to shrink, the shadowy fur receding, the twisted bones straightening. The red glow in his eyes faded, replaced by their natural, piercing gold. When the light subsided, Theron stood where the monster had been. He was naked, his body slick with sweat, trembling with exhaustion, but he was whole. He was a man. But behind him, shimmering in the air like a heat haze, was the form of his wolf. It was not the shadow beast of the curse. It was a magnificent creature, a dire wolf of immense size, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes the same gold as the man's. The curse was not gone, but it had been separated, purified. His true wolf, suppressed for so long, had been freed. The hall was utterly silent, the assembled alphas staring in disbelief. They had not witnessed a monster being put down, but a king being reborn. Theron's gaze found Alara's. He took a staggering step toward her, his legs threatening to give out. She rushed to him, catching him as he fell to his knees. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face against her stomach, his body racked with shuddering breaths. "You saved me," he choked out, the words muffled by her dress. "You saved me from myself." "No," she whispered, her fingers tangling in his hair. "We saved each other." Cale was the first to move. He ripped a heavy cloak from a wall tapestry and draped it over his king's shoulders. He then turned to the rest of the hall, his voice ringing with an authority no one dared challenge. "You have witnessed not a curse, but a trial," Cale announced. "Our king has carried a great burden, a wound from his youth. Tonight, with the strength of his fated mate, he has overcome it. You have not seen the end of your king, but his true beginning." He then pointed to the groaning form of Vorlog, who was being attended by his personal guards. "And you have seen a traitor try to usurp the throne through deceit and murder. Seize him." The king's royal guard, loyal to Theron above all, surged forward. Vorlog's men made a brief token effort to defend him, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Vorlog, clutching a shattered arm, was hauled to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent fury. "You will all pay for this," he shrieked. "He is a monster!" A ticking bomb. Theron rose to his feet, Alara still at his side. He looked at his uncle, his golden eyes cold as a winter sky. The shimmering form of his true wolf solidified behind him, a silent, deadly promise. "No, uncle," Theron said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the hall. "The monster was the cage I built around my own soul. And you were the one who kept rattling the bars." He looked at his guards. "Take him to the dungeons. He will await my judgment." As Vorlog was dragged away, screaming threats and curses, Theron turned to the stunned delegation from Silver Creek. Alpha Kalen stepped forward, his earlier boisterousness gone, replaced by a look of profound respect. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "We have misjudged you, King Theron," Kalen said, his voice filled with awe. "We saw only the beast. We did not see the man fighting it. My pack and my sword are yours to command." One by one, the other alphas in the hall knelt, pledging their fealty not out of fear, but out of genuine reverence. They had witnessed a display of power far greater than brute strength, the power of a bond that could purify a soul and break a curse. Theron stood tall, Ilara's hand held tightly in his. He was no longer the Beast King, a ruler of shadows. He was Theron, the Alpha King, with his true wolf at his back and his fated mate at his side. The battle was won. His secret was out. And for the first time, he felt truly free. In the aftermath of the feast, a new era began for the Obsidian Spire. The story of what had happened spread like wildfire through the northern clans. Tales of the Beast King's monstrous transformation were quickly overshadowed by the legend of his rebirth and of the blind Omega whose love had been the catalyst. Alara was no longer seen as a shameful tribute or a royal pet. She was the Luna healer, a figure of awe and reverence. Vorlog was tried for high treason. The servant he had coerced confessed everything, and other members of the court, no longer fearing Vorlog's influence, came forward with stories of his manipulations and treachery over the years. He was found guilty and sentenced to the black cells, a punishment worse than death, to live out his days in total darkness and isolation. With the external threat neutralized, Theron and Alara could finally focus on themselves. The bond between them, now fully acknowledged, was a living, breathing thing. Theron found that while the curse was not entirely vanquished, it was a scar on his soul that would always remain. He now had control. His true wolf, magnificent and powerful, was the dominant force. With Alara near, the shadowy remnants of the curse remained dormant, a sleeping serpent. Their relationship, born in darkness and desperation, now blossomed in the light. Theron took her to the highest peak of the mountain, a place he had never shared with anyone. As the sun set, he described the explosion of colors, the fiery oranges, the soft pinks, the deep purples, with a poet's passion she had never heard from him before. "It's beautiful," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of the last rays on her skin. "Not as beautiful as the world you have shown me," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. "A world where strength is found in gentleness, and true sight has nothing to do with the eyes." It was there, under the nascent stars, that he formally asked her. Alara of the Whispering Fen, Ilara the healer, my solace and my salvation. Be my wife, be my queen, be my Luna, now and for all our lives." Tears of joy tracked paths down her cheeks. "There has never been a moment since I met you that I have not been yours," she answered. He sealed their promise with a kiss, a tender, searching expression of all the pain, hope, and love that had passed between them. It was a kiss that remade the world. Their union ceremony was held a week later, not in the grim Great Hall, but in the open air of the fortress's highest courtyard, witnessed by the alphas of the allied clans and all the staff of the Obsidian Spire. Ilara wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered in the sunlight, and instead of a crown, she wore a simple circlet of mountain wildflowers that the castle children had picked for her. Theron stood before his people, no longer a king cloaked in fear, but a leader radiating a quiet, confident strength. He performed the ancient ritual, the claiming of a mate. He bared his teeth and, with infinite gentleness, marked the juncture of her neck and shoulder. Ilara gasped as the bond slammed into its final permanent place. A jolt of pure energy, of life and love, surged through her. She felt his strength become hers, his wolf a comforting presence in the back of her mind, a loyal guardian to her soul. She felt complete. In turn, she placed her hands on his chest, over his heart, and let her own energy flow into him, a silent vow to be his healer, his anchor, his peace, for all their days. Their union heralded great change. Theron, guided by Ilara's compassion, began to rule differently. Strength was still valued, but it was now tempered with justice and mercy. He opened the spire's overflowing granaries to aid packs suffering from poor harvests, including the Whispering Fen. He established a council where even Omegas had a voice, recognizing that the health of a pack depended on all its members, not just its strongest warriors. Ilara's father, Alpha Marcus, came to the spire to offer his formal apology. He stood before his daughter, now a queen, and bowed his head in shame. "I was a fool," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I saw only your perceived flaws. I was blind, not you. I threw away my greatest treasure." Ilara felt a pang of old hurt, but it was a distant echo. She had found her own worth, her own pack, her own family. "You did what you thought was necessary to survive, father," she said, her voice even. "I have found my own way to survive. And to thrive." She offered forgiveness not for his sake, but for her own, to sever the last tie to the pain of her past. She became a beloved queen. She established healing centers throughout the kingdom, training others who had a sensitivity like hers, teaching them to hone their empathic gifts. The soft powers, once derided, became a respected and vital part of their society. The kingdom, once ruled by a beast king, was now known for its compassion and resilience. It was stronger than ever before. 1 year later, the scent of spring was intoxicating on the mountain. Ilara sat on a stone bench in the queen's garden, a place she had resurrected from weeds and neglect into a vibrant tapestry of scents and textures. The sun was warm on her face, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet perfume of moon-petal blossoms. A heavy warmth settled in her lap, and she smiled, placing a protective hand over the swell of her belly. The healers had been shocked. A wolfless Omega, thought to be barren, was carrying the heir to the Alpha King. It was a miracle, they said. But Ilara knew it was simply the power of a bond that had defied curses and remade destinies. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar, beloved scent of pine, ozone, and pure Theron enveloped her. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his own hand coming to rest beside hers on their unborn child. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low, contented rumble against her ear. "About how a year ago I was standing on a dais, waiting to be sold," she confessed softly. "I thought my life was over. Theron's arms tightened around her. "That was the day my life began," he said with fierce conviction. "I was a ghost haunting my own castle, and you, my love, were the one who brought me back to life." A small, happy cry broke the peaceful silence. A little girl of about 5, the daughter of a guard, toddled toward them, her hands full of freshly picked dandelions. She stumbled and fell, her knee scraping on the gravel path. Tears welled in her eyes. Before Theron could even move, Alara was rising from the bench. "I've got this," she said, with a gentle smile. She knelt before the crying child, her movements sure and graceful. "Oh, little one, that looks like it hurts," she said, her voice a soft melody. She held out her hand. "May I?" The little girl, recognizing her queen, nodded tearfully and held out her scraped knee. Alara placed her hand over the injury, and the child's sobs immediately quieted, her eyes wide with wonder as a gentle, soothing warmth spread through her leg, chasing the pain away. "All better?" Alara asked, wiping a tear from the girl's cheek. The girl nodded, then shyly offered Alara her fistful of dandelions. "For the baby," she whispered. "Thank you," Alara said, her heart swelling. "They're beautiful." Theron watched the exchange, his chest tight with a love so powerful it almost hurt. This was his queen, not a warrior, not a political strategist, but a healer of scrapes and souls. She had not only healed him, but she was healing his entire kingdom, one small act of kindness at a time. As the little girl ran off to play, Theron helped Alara back to the bench. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "They called me the Beast King," he said, his golden eyes full of adoration. "But you, my Alara, you have the heart of a lioness and the soul of a queen. You have built an empire not of stone and steel, but of compassion and hope." She smiled, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. In her mind's eye, she could not see the color of his eyes or the shape of his face, but she could see his soul, a brilliant, steady light that had once been shrouded in darkness, and he could see hers, a quiet, resilient flame that had guided him home. Together, in their shared world of sensation and love, they were whole. The blind Omega and the broken king had found their sight in each other, building a future that was brighter than any sunrise over the mountains.